Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. But medieval laws, some of them were created for reasons so bizarre, so wildly specific, that they seem almost like the product of a prank rather than a legal system. And the craziest part, many of these laws came into existence because of one insane incident. Just a single event, sometimes ridiculous, sometimes shocking, was enough to convince an entire town, a king, or a council of lords to write a law that would last for decades, if not centuries. Let's start with one of my absolute favorites. Imagine a quiet village somewhere in England during the 14th century. Life is simple. People farm, sell their goods in the market, tend to their animals. But two families, let's call them the Smiths and the Browns, couldn't get along. They had small disagreements, nothing unusual, but over time, these arguments escalated. And then, one day, it exploded into a full-blown feud. Not a sword fight, not a duel, but a war of throwing dung at each other. Yes, actual piles of waste hurled across the village square. People were slipping, carts were overturned, and the market was destroyed. It was chaos. The local authorities had to step in, and the solution was a law explicitly banning villagers from throwing dung at their neighbors. They didn't just make a vague rule about disorderly conduct. No, this law was specific. Dung throwing was illegal. Imagine that. You could probably live in that village a century later and still technically be breaking a law that existed because of a feud between two families. And that's the theme here. Medieval lawmakers often reacted to immediate, chaotic incidents. Unlike modern legislation, which tends to consider broader principles, medieval laws were often about putting a stop to something that had already gone wrong, sometimes in the most ridiculous ways imaginable. Take, for instance, the story of a sneaky thief in 13th century France. This man figured out a clever trick to steal from local markets without getting caught. Instead of punishing just him, the authorities decided to prevent future thefts by passing a law restricting certain behaviors in public spaces. One result, a law that forbade walking backward in public streets. Why? Because this thief used to sneak backward behind merchant stalls to steal goods unseen. It sounds absurd now, but in the moment, this law made perfect sense. People feared another thief using the same trick, and the law was a preventative measure. And then, there's the issue of public disasters. Medieval towns were often chaotic spaces, narrow streets, crowded markets, livestock roaming freely. So when one town experienced a chicken stampede that injured dozens and destroyed market stalls, the solution was a law banning chickens or geese from roaming the streets. One insane incident, and suddenly, the whole town was legally protected from the chaos of farm animals. It's almost funny to imagine a medieval council debating, yes, we must save our streets from chickens. But these rules were serious at the time. Medieval laws also reveal a lot about social priorities, fears, and the peculiar way order was defined. Kings and lords weren't necessarily thinking about justice in a universal sense. They were reacting to very real, very immediate problems. Sometimes, those problems were dangerous, like the dung-throwing feud, and sometimes they were just socially embarrassing, like the case of a noblewoman wearing purple. In parts of Europe, women were banned from wearing certain colors after one scandalous incident where a high-ranking lady showed up at a feast, dressed entirely in purple, sparking outrage and jealousy. That single fashion choice led to a law that affected many women for years. And then there are laws inspired by accidents. One town prohibited men from carrying hammers on Sundays because of a mishap where someone accidentally destroyed a church door while trying to repair it. Another law from England forbade pulling one's hair in public, a response to an infamous brawl where two villagers literally pulled each other's hair until one was seriously injured. These laws seem laughable now, but back then, they were necessary to maintain order, at least prevent chaos from spreading. Now, let's talk about some laws that seem straight out of a comedy show. In Scotland, there was a law forbidding men from having beards of a certain length if they wanted to enter a church. Why? Because a local priest complained that overly long beards kept brushing the pews and disturbing the congregation. That's it. The law existed to stop beard interference. Then there's the law from France that banned women from marrying without the local lord's permission if they had too many cats. Why? Apparently, one woman's cats caused so much noise, theft, and chaos that it angered the neighbors, and the Lord decided to intervene. And these weren't isolated incidents. In Italy, there was a law preventing people from playing chess during certain hours of the day. because one nobleman allegedly got so obsessed with the game that he ignored his duties, causing political tension. Another law in England prohibited spitting on the streets, not because of hygiene, at least not officially, but because one incident of a public spat escalated into a massive street fight. Then there are the laws that sound like they belong in a fantasy story. For example, one law required bakers to ring a bell before opening their shops in the morning. Why? Because a previous incident involved someone trying to sneak bread from the oven before it was properly cooked, leading to a huge argument. Or the law that forbade anyone from eating meat on Fridays in certain towns, not just for religious reasons, but because one festival-goer's feast got so out of control that it almost caused a riot. Even everyday items could inspire laws. In some towns, people were banned from wearing hats with feathers above a certain height. Why? Because one nobleman's excessively tall feathered hat blocked the view at public events, causing fights and disputes. There was also a law preventing people from carrying onions into certain markets, because one incident involved onions being thrown during a fight, causing injuries. You start to see a pattern. Medieval lawmakers were highly reactive, addressing the specific chaos that each incident caused. Some laws were about controlling animals, too. In medieval England, one town banned swans from being kept in private ponds. Why? Because one particularly aggressive swan attacked a visiting nobleman, causing outrage. Another law prohibited hunting deer with dogs on Sundays, stemming from an incident where a noble's dog chased a deer through a village, injuring a child. Medieval lawmakers clearly had a strong focus on preventing incidents that could harm humans or disrupt social harmony, even if the solution seems over the top today. And sometimes the law tried to manage human behavior in hilarious ways. One law in France forbade people from kissing in public squares because one overly affectionate couple caused a distraction that led to a serious car accident. Another law prohibited singing too loudly at night because a bard's overly enthusiastic performance had scared livestock and upset the neighbors. You might imagine someone in a medieval council saying, "Gentlemen, this bard must be stopped." And thus, the law was born. Now, a few laws came from utterly bizarre incidents that sound impossible today. In parts of Germany, one town passed a law banning people from carrying wooden spoons in the streets. Why? Because during a festival, a drunken brawl broke out where villagers used wooden spoons as weapons, causing chaos. In another case, a town outlawed anyone from wearing shoes with bells on them because one resident's jingly footwear distracted guards during an important procession. Each law has a story, each one triggered by one seemingly minor incident that spiraled into chaos. By now, you might be noticing a pattern. Medieval laws were often specific, reactive, and hilariously narrow. Unlike modern legislation that addresses broad societal issues, these laws dealt with exact incidents that left authorities scrambling for a solution. They give us a window into medieval life, the fears, the conflicts, the petty dramas, and even the humor. One family feud, one thief, one overly dramatic noblewoman could shape legal history for decades. And the more you look, the funnier it gets, because some of these laws stayed on the books long after the original incident was forgotten. And here's the kicker. These laws were enforceable. Imagine living in a village where throwing dung at your neighbor could get you in legal trouble, or where walking backward in the streets could technically land you in front of a local judge. These weren't just stories or rumors, they were part of daily life, part of the legal framework, part of the medieval reality, and in many cases, the law was the only tool to prevent similar chaos from happening again. So tonight, as we slowly drift through history, we'll explore these bizarre, hilarious, and sometimes shocking medieval laws that existed purely because of one insane incident. We'll meet thieves who inspired backward-walking bans, nobles who caused fashion laws, villagers who threw dung, bards who got banned for singing too loudly, and countless other unforgettable characters. Every law has a story, every story has a lesson, and every lesson reminds us that life in the Middle Ages could be just as absurd as it was strict. And as we settle into this journey, just remember, the laws we'll explore weren't written for convenience, they were written for survival, for order, and often because someone somewhere did something so outrageous that a law was the only way to stop it from happening again. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but always, the stories behind these laws are fascinating, funny, and completely unforgettable. And so, as we continue our journey through medieval legal absurdities, Let's look at some laws that were inspired by criminal acts and everyday chaos, but with a twist of hilarity you won't believe. Imagine living in a world where the simplest mistakes could spawn centuries-long rules. For example, there was a law in medieval England that banned people from carrying dice or playing certain games in the streets. Now, you might think this was just about gambling, but the story behind it is far stranger. In one town, a dispute over a dice game escalated into a riot, where merchants were trampled, carts overturned, and one poor baker ended up with a loaf smashed on his head. After that incident, the local lord declared that playing dice in the streets would be illegal. It wasn't just about cheating, it was about preventing chaos from erupting again. And sometimes the laws were inspired by the oddest public spectacles. In France, one law prohibited the use of fireworks in town celebrations. Why? Because during one festival, an ambitious pyrotechnician's fireworks accidentally set a noble's house on fire. The fire spread so quickly that the town almost burned to the ground. From then on, fireworks were outlawed unless explicitly approved by the mayor. Medieval authorities weren't messing around when it came to safety, even if the rules seem extreme today. Animal-related laws were especially peculiar. In parts of England, a law forbade men from keeping ferrets in their homes after one incident in which a man's ferrets escaped, killed several chickens, and caused a neighbor to trip over the chaos. Ferrets may be small, but apparently they were considered dangerous enough to justify legislation. Similarly, in Germany, one town passed a law requiring dogs to wear muzzles in public after a rabid dog attacked multiple children. While that may seem sensible, what's as funny is that the law also included penalties for owners if their dog barked too loudly, because during the incident, the barking had contributed to the panic. And then there were laws that targeted human behavior in almost absurdly specific ways. In Italy, one law forbade men from flirting with married women in public after a single case of an affair that caused a duel between two noblemen. Another law banned people from whistling at night, because in one village, a mischievous group of youths used whistling to signal their friends during a burglary. That law didn't just make whistling illegal, it was enforceable. If you were caught whistling in public after dark, the authorities could fine or punish you. Let's not forget the laws surrounding markets and trade, which could get incredibly detailed. In medieval England, one town prohibited bakers from using certain shapes for bread because one baker had shaped loaves in a way that offended a nobleman. In France, merchants were banned from selling meat that wasn't cut to precise sizes because a dispute over portions had escalated into violence during a market day. In another town, a law forbade fishermen from selling fish that were too small, not only to preserve resources, but because one incident of undersized fish caused a food fight in the market that ended in injuries. These laws may seem trivial, but they all had real consequences at the time. Some laws addressed social etiquette in ways that would make us laugh today. In Scotland, one law banned people from sitting on a neighbor's doorstep without permission, because during one festival, several villagers sat outside the wrong homes, blocked traffic, and caused a dispute that nearly escalated into a brawl. In Germany, there was a law forbidding men from wearing belts over a certain width, because one man's excessively wide belt caused him to knock over a noble's display of wares in a busy market. Laws like this highlight how medieval authorities tried to control order in a society where everyday objects and actions could unexpectedly spark chaos. And of course, some laws were inspired by particularly dramatic accidents. In England, one law prohibited carrying hot coals through the streets because a young boy once dropped a basket of coals on a crowded market day, setting a stall on fire and injuring a passerby. Another law forbade swinging swords or sticks near town gates because one man, practicing for a tournament, accidentally hit a messenger who was delivering important documents. The medieval authorities clearly believed that if a single incident could cause injury or disorder, a law was necessary to prevent it from happening again. Religious laws could also arise from very specific incidents. For example, one law in France forbade people from entering a church barefoot because a scandal erupted when a wealthy woman attended a service without shoes, and the congregation found it offensive. Another law prohibited talking during sermons after an incident in which a group of children's chatter distracted the priest, causing a fire to start in the candles while nobody noticed. Even in spiritual spaces, a single chaotic event could trigger rules that would endure for generations. Some laws were downright weird from today's perspective. In one German town, a law forbade anyone from walking backwards into a well. You might be thinking, why would that even happen? Well, it did. One night, a man walking backward, perhaps under the influence of ale, fell into the town well. Luckily, he survived, but the town council decided that this accident was serious enough to justify a law. And yes, that law remained enforceable for decades. Then there are the laws influenced by sheer social awkwardness. In medieval France, one law prohibited public displays of affection beyond a handshake, because a young couple kissing on a street corner once caused a jealous noble to challenge the man to a duel. Another law restricted the wearing of extravagant hats at public events, following an incident where a man's massive feathered hat blocked the view of an entire audience during a festival performance. Medieval lawmakers were clearly sensitive to what we might call social nuisances today. Sometimes, laws tried to anticipate trouble before it happened, but often, the incidents had already occurred once. In England, towns passed regulations against carrying weapons that could double as everyday tools, like knives or walking sticks, after one street fight escalated because a man's cane had a hidden blade. In Italy, a law forbade playing loud musical instruments near noble residences after one troubadour's early morning performance woke the lord's household, resulting in a night-long argument that ended in a minor riot. These examples show that medieval authorities often reacted quickly and creatively to prevent chaos from repeating. And then, there were laws that seem almost literally unbelievable. In one English town, a law prohibited children from flying kites near the marketplace because during a festival, several kites got tangled with food stalls, knocking over produce and startling livestock. Another law forbade people from running through town streets wearing masks, after a masked prankster caused a panic by pretending to be a thief. You might imagine a medieval town council spending hours debating these rules, but apparently, that's exactly what they did. Some laws even tried to control seemingly harmless objects. In France, one law prohibited carrying large umbrellas indoors after one wealthy visitor accidentally knocked over a vase that belonged to the king. In Germany, a law banned wearing rings above a certain size because during a public event, a massive ring caught on the clothing of several participants, causing chaos. These tiny, precise rules remind us that medieval life was unpredictable, and lawmakers had to deal with the very real consequences of seemingly minor accidents. And of course, laws related to festivals and celebrations were some of the strangest of all. In England, one law prohibited jousting tournaments near marketplaces after one tournament caused such a mess that carts, livestock, and spectators were all injured. Another law forbade the throwing of apples or other fruits during public games because, in one incident, an apple fight escalated into serious injuries and property damage. Medieval lawmakers clearly believed that if one incident could go wrong, it was better to codify a rule than leave it to chance. So, as we wander through these bizarre laws, one thing becomes clear: medieval lawmakers were extremely reactive, highly specific, and surprisingly imaginative. One accident, one feud, or one chaotic festival could spawn a rule that lasted for decades or even centuries. From dunk-throwing bans to prohibitions on walking backward, from rules about shoes in churches to limits on feathered hats, medieval laws were a direct reflection of life's unpredictable chaos. And with that, we're just scratching the surface. In the next chunk, we'll dive even deeper into laws inspired by market chaos, public riots, and some of the strangest criminal acts you'll ever hear about. We'll meet thieves, pranksters, and overzealous nobles who all left their mark on the legal history of the Middle Ages. Each law has a story, and each story reminds us that medieval life was just as unpredictable, humorous, and absurd as it was strict. As we continue our journey through the strangest medieval laws, it's fascinating to see how much of daily life could spiral into legal action after just one chaotic incident. Take, for example, the small town of York in the late 13th century. There was a feud between two prominent families over, well, let's say a very public disagreement about property boundaries. Tempers flared, insults were thrown, and soon enough, one of the families decided to take matters into their own hands. They vandalized each other's homes, stole livestock, and even set small fires to scare their rivals. The local council had no choice but to step in. Their solution, a law specifically outlining how property disputes must be handled and explicitly forbidding acts of sabotage, theft, or arson between neighbors. Today, it reads like a basic property law, but at the time, it was a direct response to one heated feud that had nearly torn the town apart. And it wasn't just property disputes that inspired laws. Public pranks could also have legal consequences. In medieval France, a group of mischievous youths once released pigs into the marketplace during a festival. The animals ran wild, overturning stalls, scattering produce, and frightening both townspeople and visiting nobles. The chaos was so extreme that the mayor passed a law forbidding the release of livestock in public spaces without permission. It seems absurd now, but the townspeople at the time considered it a necessary measure to maintain order and prevent future pranks from escalating into disaster. Some laws targeted very specific criminal acts. In Germany, there was a man who gained a reputation for climbing onto rooftops and stealing chickens directly from people's homes. After one particularly aggressive raid left several families without their morning eggs, the town council passed a law prohibiting anyone from climbing onto rooftops without permission. Again, it seems oddly specific, but in a world without modern security systems, it was a practical response to a very real problem. Even everyday arguments could inspire laws. In England, one dispute over the ownership of a simple chicken escalated into a full-blown brawl involving multiple families, overturned carts, and broken windows. The town responded by creating a law requiring disputes over livestock to be settled through formal mediation rather than fighting. It's funny to think that one chicken could change the course of legal history. But in medieval towns, even small possessions had enormous social and economic value. And then there were laws born from chaotic festivals. In Italy, a popular festival involved a game where townspeople would throw oranges at each other. One year, the festivities got so out of hand that someone was seriously injured and property was damaged. The local authorities reacted by passing a law restricting fruit, throwing games, and limiting them to designated areas with supervision. What started as a fun tradition became heavily regulated after a single dangerous incident, showing how quickly medieval law could adapt to prevent repeat chaos. Public drunkenness was another common trigger for legal intervention. In England, one town issued a law prohibiting excessive drinking in the streets after a festival brawl left several merchants injured and many goods destroyed. Similarly, in Germany, a law was passed limiting the sale of ale during public holidays after a drunken fight led to the accidental burning of a baker's oven. Medieval lawmakers were very concerned with preventing immediate physical danger, even if it meant regulating everyday behavior in ways we might find overbearing today. Sometimes laws were surprisingly specific about attire or personal accessories. In France, one law banned wearing pointed shoes that were too long because a young noble tripped on his own footwear during a ceremonial procession, causing a domino effect that sent several other nobles tumbling. In England, certain towns forbade wearing hats with feathers over a certain height after a festival incident where a nobleman's extravagant headgear knocked over a cart of market goods. These rules might seem comical today, but they were serious attempts to prevent accidents and maintain social order. And it wasn't just objects or clothing that inspired laws. Words and gestures were regulated too. In Italy, a law prohibited making obscene gestures in public after one incident where two men, crude signaling, escalated into a full-scale fight, resulting in injuries and property damage. In Germany, a law was passed forbidding certain types of insults during town meetings after one particularly heated argument disrupted local governance. Medieval lawmakers clearly understood that even small provocations could quickly escalate into chaos. Animal behavior was also a frequent cause of legal action. In England, a town banned dogs from running loose after one incident where a pack of stray dogs attacked a market vendor, scattering produce and causing panic among customers. Similarly, in France, a law prohibited keeping swans in private ponds after a particularly aggressive swan attacked a visiting nobleman during a garden tour. Medieval authorities seemed to believe that if one animal could cause trouble once, it could do so again, and laws were written to prevent repeat incidents. And festivals were notorious for inspiring highly specific legislation. In Italy, one law prohibited certain types of competitive games involving sticks or clubs after one match led to multiple injuries and a small fire in the marketplace. Another law restricted the throwing of flour during celebrations after an overly enthusiastic baker accidentally blinded a spectator. These rules illustrate how medieval law often served as a safety mechanism, codifying lessons learned from very real, sometimes very painful incidents. Even the smallest daily activities could inspire regulations. In England, one law forbade carrying hot pans through the streets after an apprentice dropped a skillet of boiling soup, causing burns and starting a small fire. In Germany, a law prohibited swinging buckets of water in town squares because one playful youth accidentally soaked a visiting noble, leading to outrage. Medieval lawmakers clearly believed that preventing accidents was worth creating very precise, enforceable laws. And of course, some laws were inspired purely by social embarrassment. In France, one law forbade public displays of affection beyond a handshake because a young couple's kiss in the marketplace triggered a jealous nobleman to challenge the man to a duel. In England, a law prohibited loud singing at night after one bard's performance frightened livestock and disturbed neighbors. These laws reveal that medieval authorities were keenly aware of how public behavior could escalate into serious problems, even if it seemed trivial to outsiders. So, as we see, medieval law was deeply reactive. One feud, one accident, or one chaotic festival could produce rules that lasted for decades or even centuries. From feuds over chickens to prankster pigs in the marketplace, from oversized hats to mischievous children. The medieval legal system was full of regulations that were direct responses to the unpredictable events of daily life. And the more we explore these laws, the funnier and more fascinating they become, especially when we imagine the councils and town meetings debating each rule, sometimes for hours, over incidents that today would barely warrant a sigh. And as our journey continues, we'll next encounter laws inspired by thieves, burglars, and other criminal masterminds whose single audacious acts shaped legal codes for generations. We'll see how their clever or reckless behavior led to rules that tried, sometimes successfully, and sometimes not, to prevent future chaos. Each law has its story, each story is unique, and each one gives us a glimpse into the strange, unpredictable world of medieval life. And so, as we drift further into the strange world of medieval laws, it's time to meet the clever or sometimes reckless criminals whose actions led directly to legal rules. In medieval towns, a single act of theft could ripple out into a law that affected an entire community for decades. Imagine a cunning thief in France who discovered a loophole in local market rules. He would sneak into the market at night, cleverly disguising himself, and take goods without being seen. One night, he managed to steal enough bread and cheese from multiple vendors that the town was thrown into chaos the following morning. Instead of merely punishing the thief, the local council created a law requiring all market stalls to be securely locked at night and forbidding certain behaviors that had allowed the theft to occur in the first place. A single criminal act had changed how an entire town ran its markets. And it wasn't just theft of goods that inspired laws. In England, there was a notorious pickpocket who would distract townspeople with street performances while sneaking purses and small valuables from unsuspecting passers-by. After one particularly audacious theft, in which the pickpocket stole from both nobles and merchants during a busy festival, the town passed a law forbidding performers from setting up too close to marketplaces or crowded streets without supervision. Essentially, the authorities had recognized that one clever criminal could exploit the chaos of daily life, and the law was meant to prevent future opportunistic thefts. Some laws arose from surprisingly inventive crimes. In Germany, a man discovered that he could smuggle small amounts of coin from one town to another by hollowing out loaves of bread. After his scheme was uncovered and caused significant financial losses to merchants and even local tax collectors, a law was passed banning the transport of hollowed or deceptive items across town boundaries. It seems odd to us now, but in the context of medieval society, this was a serious concern. Small thefts could escalate into large-scale economic problems, and the law was a way to prevent clever criminals from exploiting loopholes. And it wasn't only clever theft, sometimes sheer audacity prompted laws. In Italy, a band of burglars repeatedly broke into homes by climbing onto rooftops under the cover of night. After one dramatic incident in which the entire roof of a merchant's home was damaged during a break-in, the town council passed a law restricting access to rooftops, requiring ladders and tools to be locked up securely, and forbidding night climbing on any structure without permission. Medieval towns were densely packed, and rooftops offered easy access from one house to another. so the law addressed both security and potential accidents caused by reckless criminals. Some laws were inspired by more unusual forms of theft. In England, a mischievous group of youths discovered they could steal livestock by distracting owners with music and dancing. After several successful raids, in which goats, chickens, and even pigs were stolen, the town created laws forbidding groups from performing in certain areas without permission, essentially using performance regulation as a theft prevention measure. It's fascinating to see how authorities used indirect methods, like controlling music and street performances, to maintain order and protect property. And there were laws that came about from disputes over stolen items that were returned or not returned at the wrong time. In France, one incident involved a thief who had stolen a valuable gemstone but returned it to the wrong nobleman by mistake, sparking a feud that escalated into violence. In response, the town passed a law regulating the return of stolen property, specifying that recovered goods must be returned under supervision of local authorities to prevent arguments and potential bloodshed. Medieval law was surprisingly detailed in addressing such very specific incidents, showing that a single misstep could inspire rules that lasted for generations. Sometimes, even minor acts of cleverness could lead to laws. In Germany, one man discovered he could sneak coins from church collection boxes by attaching long rods to hooks, reaching over the edge without being seen. After this theft was uncovered, the town council passed a law requiring all collection boxes to be secured and constantly monitored during church services. This law might seem obvious to us today, but at the time, it was a direct response to a single ingenious crime that had shaken the local community as trust. And then there were laws inspired by both crime and accidents. In Italy, a thief tried to escape through a crowded marketplace and accidentally caused several stalls to collapse. The town responded by passing laws regulating movement through marketplaces during festivals and busy times, requiring that passageways be kept clear and that crowd management measures be enforced. One chaotic chase had reshaped the rules for how townspeople could navigate their own streets. Some laws also attempted to prevent clever crimes from recurring in very specific ways. In England, a man figured out that he could smuggle small amounts of ale by hiding it inside loaves of bread, bypassing taxes and guild regulations. After authorities discovered this scheme, a law was passed forbidding the transportation of food and drink in deceptive containers. This law wasn't about morality or crime in general. It was a direct response to one particularly sneaky individual. Criminal acts could even influence social behavior laws. In France, a pickpocket's partner would intentionally bump into nobles and merchants to create distractions. After one particularly egregious incident during a festival, the town created a law forbidding public bumping or shoving in crowded spaces, essentially turning a criminal tactic into a legal regulation. Medieval lawmakers clearly believed that preventing a repeat of a single incident was worth codifying a rule for everyone. And of course, theft wasn't always about material gain. It could also inspire laws regarding mischief and harassment. In Germany, a man repeatedly placed prank objects, like loose stones or slippery hides, in front of neighbors' doors to trip them and cause embarrassment. After one incident where an elderly woman fell and was injured, the town passed a law forbidding the placement of objects in public walkways. Again, it was a law born directly from one mischievous individual's actions, demonstrating how seriously medieval authorities treated incidents that could cause harm or disorder. Even seemingly minor criminal acts could have wide-reaching consequences. In England, a thief stole chickens but left the doors open to the henhouse, allowing the rest of the flock to escape. This led to a law regulating how livestock should be secured, ensuring that negligence or theft wouldn't result in large-scale losses. Medieval towns depended heavily on livestock for survival, so laws protecting animals were essential, and often inspired by very specific incidents. Some laws were inspired by criminal acts that didn't succeed. In Italy, a would-be burglar attempted to steal from a noble's treasury, but triggered an alarm system that caused a chaotic chase through the streets. The town council responded by passing laws regulating nighttime movement, specifying that ladders, ropes, and other climbing tools must be secured, effectively preventing repeat attempts. Even failed crimes left their mark on the legal system, and there were laws born from the combination of theft and social embarrassment. In France, a thief stole a noblewoman's ceremonial gown and wore it in public, causing outrage and scandal. In response, the town passed a law prohibiting public wearing of someone else's clothing without consent, combining theft prevention with protection of social decorum. Medieval lawmakers clearly recognized that some crimes weren't just material, they were social, cultural, and potentially explosive in their consequences. So, as we reflect on these examples, it becomes clear that medieval law was deeply reactive, often very specific, and sometimes surprisingly creative. One clever thief, one audacious burglary, or one mischievous prank could inspire regulations that would last for decades. From pickpockets to rooftop climbers, from deceptive merchants to playful tricksters, medieval lawmakers codified their responses to protect property, safety, and social order. And the more we explore these stories, the more we realize how unpredictable life was back then, and how a single act could ripple through society in ways we would never imagine today. And as our journey continues, in the next chunk, we'll explore laws inspired by public safety, dangerous tools, and chaotic celebrations. Diving deeper into the bizarre, often hilarious ways medieval authorities tried to maintain order. Each law has a story, and each story paints a vivid picture of life in the Middle Ages, where one incident, no matter how small or absurd, could change the rules for everyone. And so, as we drift further into the curious world of medieval laws, let's explore the rules that were inspired by accidents, tools, and the chaos of festivals, because in the Middle Ages, a single mishap could quickly become the reason for a law. Imagine, for instance, a bustling English marketplace, crowded with vendors, carts, animals, and townsfolk. One unfortunate day, a young apprentice carrying a basket of hot coals trips and drops them, setting a wooden stall ablaze. The fire spreads just enough to cause panic and minor injuries. In response, the town council passed a law prohibiting the carrying of hot coals through streets during market hours. Today, it sounds oddly specific and maybe a little overprotective, but at the time, it was a practical way to prevent a repeat disaster. Accidents involving everyday tools were just as influential. In Germany, a carpenter accidentally swung his mallet too forcefully while working near a crowded street, knocking over a cart of produce and injuring a bystander. Following this incident, the town enacted a law requiring craftsmen to secure their tools and maintain a safe distance from public spaces when working. Similarly, in Italy, a blacksmith's hammer slipped while forging near the main square, hitting a passerby and causing enough concern that local authorities created a law regulating the use of heavy tools in communal areas. It seems mundane now, but for a society without modern safety measures, these rules were essential for maintaining order. And festivals were another major source of legal inspiration. While they were times of joy and celebration, they could also be wildly chaotic. In England, a spring festival involved a parade of floats, music, and dancing. During one particular event, an exuberant participant toppled a float, which then collided with a food stall, injuring a few spectators and causing a small fire. The town council responded by passing laws requiring that festival floats be securely anchored and that certain safety measures be enforced during public celebrations. Festivals were meant to entertain, but one incident was enough to turn merrymaking into legislation. Sometimes, the accidents were almost comically mundane but serious enough to warrant a law. In France, one person accidentally dropped a basket of apples onto a crowded street, causing a chain reaction where vendors slipped, animals bolted, and a young child was hurt. The local authorities responded by creating a law regulating how goods should be carried through public areas, essentially trying to prevent fruit-related chaos from repeating. It seems funny to us today, but in medieval times, these minor accidents could escalate quickly. Tools again played a role in more unusual laws. In England, a man tried to demonstrate a new type of spear to the town militia, but accidentally struck a horse in the process, causing it to bolt and damage several homes. This led to a law specifying how new weapons could be demonstrated in public spaces, preventing similar accidents. Likewise, in Germany, towns passed regulations about the storage of knives, axes, and other potentially dangerous implements after incidents where careless handling led to injuries. Tools, accidents, and mishaps, combined with the density of medieval towns, made legal regulation almost unavoidable. And then there were laws born from particularly chaotic public gatherings. In Italy, a popular festival included a game where townspeople hurled balls of hay at one another. During one event, the game got out of hand, Carts were knocked over, windows shattered, and livestock scattered. The town's response was to pass laws limiting such games to specific areas and times, essentially creating the first crowd control rules for public festivities. Similarly, in England, a law prohibited the throwing of flour during celebrations after a baker's overly enthusiastic demonstration caused injuries and property damage. These laws reflect a society constantly balancing merriment with safety. Sometimes, accidents were almost poetic in their absurdity. In France, a musician accidentally knocked over a candle while performing in a crowded hall, igniting a tapestry and causing panic. This led to laws regulating candle placement during performances and ensuring that venues were properly monitored. In Germany, a similar law arose after one young man's juggling demonstration went awry, sending sharp knives flying across a public square. Medieval authorities clearly believed that a single incident could justify strict and specific regulations. Even small acts of negligence could inspire laws. In England, one man left a ladder propped against a wall overnight, and it collapsed the next morning, injuring a neighbor. The council passed a law forbidding the improper storage of ladders in public spaces, with fines for non-compliance. In Italy, a similar law was enacted when a barrel of water, left on a rooftop, fell during a festival and caused chaos in the streets below. Medieval lawmakers were often focused on preventing hazards that might seem trivial to us today, but were significant risks at the time. And accidents weren't always purely physical, they could involve social disruption as well. In France, one festival's bonfire got out of control, and villagers panicked, damaging nearby homes. The resulting law regulated how fires could be built and supervised during public celebrations. Similarly, in Germany, an impromptu street performance led to a stampede when the crowd became too excited. The town's response was to enact regulations about crowd control and performance spaces, showing that even entertainment could trigger legal intervention. Then there were laws influenced by children's mischief. In England, a child accidentally tripped over a rope in a crowded marketplace, causing several carts to topple. The town council passed a law requiring ropes and cords to be clearly marked and secured during busy market days. In Italy, a group of children playing near a fountain accidentally caused a flood in a nearby street, inspiring laws about public water features and their safe use during play. Medieval authorities were remarkably proactive or reactive depending on your perspective, codifying rules to prevent seemingly innocent accidents from becoming disasters. Even seemingly trivial objects could inspire legal regulations. In France, towns passed laws regulating the size of sticks that could be carried through public areas, after one incident where a stick-wielding youth accidentally knocked a nobleman off his horse. In England, there were laws about the placement of barrels in streets after one barrel rolled into a crowd during market day, injuring several people. Objects that seem harmless today were treated as potential hazards in medieval towns, and the law reflected that mindset. Accidents could also inspire rules about personal behavior. In Germany, one law prohibited running in the streets after a chase between thieves and townspeople led to multiple injuries. In Italy, a law forbade carrying food or drink on ladders, following an incident where a man tried to deliver wine to a festival from a balcony and dropped it onto the crowd below. Medieval authorities clearly believed that codifying prevention rules was better than dealing with chaos after it occurred. And of course, public performances were a rich source of legislation. In England, a street performer accidentally set his juggling torches onto a cart of hay, sparking panic and minor injuries. The town council responded by creating laws about public performances, fire safety, and audience placement. Similarly, in France, one juggler accidentally knocked over a market stall while performing, inspiring laws regulating the positioning of performers in busy areas. In a world without modern safety measures, one mistake could easily cause widespread harm, and the law reflected that. So as we can see, accidents, tools, and chaotic public events were fertile ground for medieval laws. Every dropped basket, runaway animal, or misplaced ladder could spark legislation that lasted decades, shaping how townspeople lived, worked, and celebrated. Medieval law was a living, breathing system, constantly reacting to the unpredictable reality of daily life. And as we settle into these stories, it's clear that even the smallest incidents could leave a lasting mark on legal history, revealing both the dangers and the humor of life in the Middle Ages. And as our journey continues, The next chunk will explore laws inspired by fire, water, and other natural hazards. Diving deeper into the strange and fascinating ways medieval societies tried to manage everyday risks. Each law has a story, and each story gives us a window into a world that was both orderly and wildly unpredictable. And so, as we continue wandering through the strange, fascinating world of medieval laws, it's time to look at the rules inspired, not by humans or their tools, but by the forces of nature, fire, water, and other hazards that could unexpectedly disrupt life. In medieval towns, where buildings were mostly wood, streets were narrow, and fire safety was basically non-existent, a single blaze could inspire laws that lasted for generations. For example, in England, after one particularly devastating fire destroyed several homes and injured townspeople, a law was passed regulating how hearths could be built and how fireplaces should be maintained. Chimneys had to be cleaned regularly, hearths were to be surrounded by stone or brick, and townspeople were forbidden from leaving fires unattended. A single blaze had changed the very way people lived, and the law ensured it wouldn't happen again, or at least tried to. Water, too, inspired surprisingly specific legislation. In France, a flood from an overflowing river once washed away bridges, destroyed farmland, and damaged homes. The local council passed laws regulating the construction of embankments, the maintenance of drainage systems, and even the timing of river crossings to minimize risk. It might seem extreme, but in a world without modern infrastructure or flood warning systems, these laws were essential. In Germany, a similar law was enacted after a spring thaw caused water to pour into a town square, sending carts and livestock tumbling. The authorities responded with detailed rules about maintaining waterways and securing property near rivers. Fire wasn't only a hazard in homes, it was also a concern during public events. In Italy, one festival went awry when torches used in a procession set a market stall on fire. The resulting law regulated how fire could be used during festivals, where torches could be carried, and who was responsible for supervising them. In England, another law prohibited the burning of bonfires near wooden structures, following an incident where a simple celebration turned into a disaster. Fire was a constant risk in the Middle Ages, and even small mishaps could lead to lasting legal protections. And accidents involving water were equally influential. In France, townspeople once left buckets of water on rooftops, thinking it would help cool the homes during a summer festival. One bucket fell, striking a passerby and causing a minor panic. The local council responded with a law regulating the placement of water containers on buildings, ensuring they couldn't accidentally harm anyone. Similarly, in Germany, one person's attempt to redirect a small stream for irrigation purposes accidentally flooded a neighboring property, inspiring laws about water management and property rights. Medieval law clearly took even minor environmental accidents seriously. Storms, too, played a role in shaping legal frameworks. In England, a sudden windstorm toppled several poorly secured market stalls, injuring people and damaging goods. The town council responded by requiring all stalls to be anchored and tied down, a law that effectively regulated how merchants could display their goods. In France, a similar storm blew down fences and knocked over livestock, prompting legislation to strengthen fences and secure animals during adverse weather. Medieval lawmakers were acutely aware that natural events could escalate into disasters and took preemptive steps to protect their communities. Even the tiniest natural hazards could inspire regulation. In Germany, one person slipped on moss growing on a stone bridge, causing a domino effect where several passers-by fell and carts collided. The town passed a law requiring regular cleaning of public pathways and bridges, essentially creating one of the earliest forms of public maintenance legislation. In Italy, another law arose after leaves and debris clogged a drainage system, causing water to pool in a busy marketplace. After one incident where a merchant's cart was damaged, the town regulated cleaning and drainage practices to prevent future problems, and festivals once again played a role in natural hazard laws. In England, one festival involved throwing water on passers-by as part of a playful tradition. One year, a slip on wet cobblestones caused a cascade of falls, injuring several children. The resulting law limited the use of water during celebrations and required certain safety measures. Similarly, in France, outdoor games involving mud pits and water led to injuries and property damage, prompting regulations about where and how these activities could take place. Even playful interactions with natural elements could leave a mark on the legal system. Some laws combined natural hazards with human behavior in fascinating ways. In Germany, one man attempted to light a fire during a festival in dry conditions, leading to a brush fire that spread through the town square. The authorities responded by creating laws restricting when and where fires could be lit, taking into account weather conditions and crowd density. In Italy, after a severe storm knocked over scaffolding during construction, towns passed laws regulating how structures should be secured against wind and rain. The interplay between nature and human activity was a constant concern for medieval lawmakers. Even everyday objects became regulated due to natural hazards. In England, a man carried a basket of eggs across a slippery bridge during winter, slipping and causing the eggs to fall and break, which startled a horse and caused a minor stampede. The town passed a law restricting movement across certain bridges in icy conditions, effectively introducing early forms of hazard prevention laws. In France, a law was created after barrels of wine were stored improperly near a riverbank and floated away during a flood, showing that storage and placement of goods were taken seriously in relation to environmental risks, and animals were part of the equation as well. In Germany, one town banned pigs from roaming near rivers after a flood incident where the pigs were swept into the town square, causing chaos and damage. In Italy, laws were enacted after livestock wandered into storm-damaged fields, destroying crops and property. Medieval authorities were keenly aware that environmental hazards could compound with human or animal behavior to create real problems, and their laws reflected this understanding. Sometimes, natural hazards prompted laws about property construction. In England, one poorly built roof collapsed under the weight of snow, injuring a passerby and damaging a neighbor's property. The town council passed a law specifying acceptable building materials, roof angles, and snow removal procedures. Similarly, in France, flooding caused by blocked drainage systems led to laws requiring property owners to maintain waterways adjacent to their land. These laws show that medieval society was deeply concerned with managing both natural and human-made risks, and even celebrations couldn't escape regulation in relation to environmental hazards. In Germany, one festival involving bonfires and torches coincided with a dry season, resulting in several small fires that damaged homes. The law that followed restricted festival fires, mandated supervision, and outlined penalties for negligence. In Italy, rain-soaked festival streets led to slips and injuries, prompting regulations about safe pathways and the timing of public events. Medieval lawmakers clearly sought to balance joy and safety, often learning lessons the hard way. So, as we reflect on these examples, it becomes clear that medieval law was not only reactive to human behavior, but also to the unpredictable forces of nature. One fire, one flood, or one storm could reshape daily life and leave lasting legal consequences. These rules, sometimes narrowly focused, sometimes surprisingly comprehensive, give us a window into a world where safety, survival, and order were constantly negotiated. And as we settle further into these stories, we begin to see a pattern. Medieval lawmakers were inventive, observant, and often quite pragmatic, codifying rules to manage every conceivable hazard, whether human, animal, or natural. And as our journey continues, the next chunk will explore laws inspired by food, drink, and public consumption, diving deeper into the bizarre and fascinating ways medieval societies regulated daily sustenance. Each law has its story, and each story reflects the unpredictability and humor of life in the Middle Ages. As we wander deeper into the strange and fascinating world of medieval laws, we arrive at a particularly savory topic: food, drink, and the curious rules that arose to manage them. In medieval towns, what people ate, how it was sold, and even how it was consumed could inspire very specific legislation, often after a single chaotic incident. Take, for instance, the bustling marketplaces of England. Vendors sold everything from bread to cheese, fish to roasted meats, and yet, one careless act could lead to disaster. One story tells of a baker who accidentally served spoiled bread to a nobleman, causing a minor scandal. The town council responded by passing a law requiring bakers to carefully inspect their loaves before selling them, essentially creating one of the earliest food safety regulations. And it wasn't only spoiled bread that inspired laws. In France, during a festival, a merchant sold wine that was too strong, leading to a group of townspeople becoming intoxicated and causing a riot in the market square. The resulting law restricted the sale of overly potent drinks to regulated times and locations. It seems amusing now, but for a society concerned with public order, one incident of drunken chaos was enough to reshape local law. Similarly, in Germany, one tavern keeper served underage customers, which led to a brawl and minor injuries. The town council responded with a law strictly regulating who could be served alcohol, setting the stage for centuries of age-related beverage rules. Markets themselves were a fertile ground for legislation. In Italy, one chaotic incident occurred when a fishmonger sold undersized fish during a busy market day. Buyers became angry, accusations flew, and a fistfight broke out among customers and merchants alike. In response, the town enacted laws specifying minimum sizes for fish sold in markets and the penalties for sellers who violated the rules. These laws weren't just about fairness, they were about preventing disorder from erupting in crowded public spaces, and the laws surrounding meat were even more precise. In England, one butcher sold tainted meat, causing illness among townspeople. The town council responded by regulating how meat should be stored, inspected, and sold. In another case, a butcher mismeasured cuts, angering both customers and rival merchants. The resulting law required uniform portion sizes, ensuring both fairness and social harmony. It's fascinating to realize that even minor mistakes in food handling could have wide-ranging consequences. Beverages, too, inspired highly specific laws. In France, one tavern owner was accused of watering down ale to increase profits. This led to a law regulating the quality of drinks sold publicly, setting penalties for adulteration. Similarly, in Germany, laws were enacted to prevent vendors from mixing different types of wine or beer in ways that might mislead customers or cause disputes. Medieval lawmakers clearly recognized that a single incident could disrupt public trust and social cohesion, and they codified rules to prevent it. Even eating in public could become regulated. In Italy, one festival attendee dropped a roasted goose while running through the streets, causing chaos as bystanders slipped and carts toppled. In response, the town passed a law prohibiting the running of hot or heavy food through crowded streets, essentially mandating caution and common sense in public consumption. In England, a law arose after a man threw bread to animals in a marketplace, startling horses and causing injuries. Medieval authorities were acutely aware that food, if mismanaged, could easily escalate into public danger, and some laws were inspired by particularly unusual incidents. In France, one baker shaped bread into exaggerated figures, which offended a visiting nobleman and sparked a dispute. The town council passed a law regulating the shapes of bread, ensuring that bakers avoided any forms that might cause offense or social tension. Similarly, in Germany, one pastry maker decorated cakes with symbols that were misinterpreted as political statements, leading to legislation about appropriate designs for public consumption. These examples show how food was intertwined with culture, social norms, and law. Markets also faced laws aimed at preventing trickery and fraud. In England, a vendor sold vegetables that had been artificially colored to appear fresher, which caused outrage among buyers. The town responded by banning deceptive practices in the selling of produce, requiring merchants to display goods honestly. In Italy, laws were enacted regulating scales and measurements in markets after one dishonest merchant's actions caused a minor riot. Medieval authorities were keenly aware that a single act of deceit could disrupt economic and social order, and they used law to enforce fairness. And then there were laws aimed at preventing food-related accidents. In Germany, one man carrying a large pot of soup tripped in a crowded marketplace, spilling scalding liquid and injuring bystanders. The town council responded with regulations on carrying hot food, emphasizing safety and responsibility in public spaces. Similarly, in France, an apprentice carrying barrels of wine accidentally let one fall, which rolled into a crowd and caused chaos. Laws regulating the handling of food and drink in public became crucial to preventing such accidents. Even preparation methods were scrutinized. In England, a law was passed requiring meat to be thoroughly cooked after one tragic incident, where improperly prepared food caused illness and minor fatalities. In Italy, laws regulated the baking of bread, ensuring that ovens reached sufficient heat to prevent disease. These rules may seem extreme today, But in a time without modern hygiene or refrigeration, one mistake could have devastating consequences, and celebrations could lead to surprisingly specific food laws. In France, one festival involved throwing fruit as part of games and competitions. One year, a tossed pumpkin hit a nobleman, causing outrage and legal action. The town passed laws regulating the throwing of objects, especially food during festivals, requiring designated areas and supervision. In Germany, a similar law arose after a pie-throwing contest during a festival led to injuries and broken stalls. Medieval lawmakers clearly wanted to preserve the fun while minimizing harm. Drinking laws also reflected concern for order. In England, a tavern brawl caused by overly intoxicated patrons prompted the town to limit the hours of ale sales and restrict service to those who were already sober. In Italy, one incident of wine spilling onto a noble's garments led to a law requiring careful handling and responsible serving of alcoholic beverages. Medieval authorities understood that alcohol could escalate minor incidents into major conflicts, and they codified rules accordingly. Even small, seemingly trivial acts could inspire legislation. In France, one baker accidentally dropped a loaf while delivering bread to a festival, causing a chain reaction of slips and injuries. The town council passed a law requiring careful delivery and handling of goods during crowded events. In Germany, a child tossing a piece of fruit in the street led to a similar law, emphasizing safety and responsibility for all ages. Medieval lawmakers clearly believed that preventing accidents through regulation was preferable to dealing with chaos afterward. So, as we reflect on these laws inspired by food, drink, and markets, a clear pattern emerges. One small mistake, one ambitious prank, or one unfortunate accident could ripple across a town, leading to regulations that lasted decades. Medieval society was acutely aware of the potential chaos surrounding sustenance, and their laws reflect both practicality and humor. From spoiled bread to flying fruit, from dangerous wine to mischievous children, the world of medieval law was intricately connected to the daily act of eating and drinking. And as our journey continues, the next chunk will explore laws inspired by marriage, family disputes, and social behavior. Diving deeper into the bizarre, often hilarious ways medieval societies regulated personal life. Each law has its story, and each story reminds us that in the Middle Ages, even the most ordinary events could leave a lasting legal mark. As we drift further into the labyrinth of medieval laws, it becomes clear that some of the most unusual rules arose not from accidents or theft, but from the tangled complexities of human relationships. Marriage, family disputes, and social behavior often sparked legislation that was both highly specific and endlessly fascinating. Imagine a small village in England, where one couple's disagreement over dowry payments escalated into a public quarrel. Words were exchanged, minor scuffles broke out, and before long, the entire village was embroiled in the argument. In response, the town council enacted a law mandating formal mediation for disputes related to marriage dowries, essentially creating a system for conflict resolution that prevented a single disagreement from destabilizing the community. And it wasn't only dowries that inspired laws. In France, a feud between two families over the proper division of inheritance escalated into physical confrontations, and even property damage. The local authorities responded by passing detailed laws specifying inheritance procedures, outlining how property should be divided, and ensuring that disagreements could be arbitrated rather than fought out in the streets. What seems like a common-sense rule today was born from one particularly explosive conflict. Family behavior could also prompt surprisingly specific legislation. In Germany, a father punished his son for breaking a household rule by publicly humiliating him, which led to riots among neighbors who felt the punishment was excessive. The town council responded by enacting a law restricting public punishments within households, aiming to prevent private disputes from spilling into public chaos. Similarly, in Italy, a dispute between siblings over the ownership of livestock inspired laws detailing the fair distribution of property among family members, preventing fights that could escalate into full-blown brawls. Marriage itself was a constant source of legal creativity. In England, one newlywed couple argued so fiercely over where to live that they caused a disturbance in the village square. The resulting law required that couples follow formal agreements regarding residence and property management, essentially creating an early form of marital legal oversight. In France, one scandal involved a man marrying multiple women in secret, leading to confusion, disputes, and public outrage. In response, authorities passed laws requiring marriages to be officially recorded and publicly announced, ensuring clarity and preventing fraudulent unions. Courtship could also inspire legislation. In Germany, a young man persistently courted a woman in a manner deemed inappropriate by neighbors, leading to public confrontations. The town council responded by creating laws defining acceptable courtship behaviors and boundaries, aiming to protect individuals while maintaining public order. In Italy, one courtship escalated into a duel between suitors, prompting laws restricting public displays of rivalry and mandating mediation. Medieval lawmakers clearly recognized that personal relationships could have public consequences, and it wasn't only disputes that mattered. Social etiquette could also lead to laws. In England, one man insulted a nobleman at a public feast, sparking a brawl that injured several bystanders. The town passed laws regulating public conduct, including rules about speech, gestures, and deference to social rank. Similarly, in France, laws were enacted to prevent insulting behavior during festivals, ensuring that celebrations remained peaceful. One rude comment could, quite literally, inspire a legal code. Family obligations were another area prone to legislation. In Germany, a son refused to support his aging parents, causing tension and public complaints. The town council responded with laws requiring children to provide for their parents, establishing clear expectations for familial responsibility. In Italy, similar laws ensured that property inheritance and support duties were followed properly, preventing disputes that might escalate into legal battles or violent confrontations. And sometimes, laws arose from more humorous incidents. In England, a man repeatedly tripped over his wife's skirts during public outings, causing minor accidents and laughter that distracted townsfolk. The town passed a law requiring careful attention to attire in public spaces, showing that even trivial domestic mishaps could influence regulation. In France, a law arose after a husband and wife argued so loudly in a marketplace that merchants lost sales. Authorities decreed that public arguments should be minimized to preserve social order. Divorce and separation also inspired legislation. In Germany, a couple's quarrel over property and children led to public disturbances during court proceedings. The town council passed detailed laws specifying how separations should be handled, including formal mediation, property division, and visitation arrangements. In Italy, laws were enacted to prevent one spouse from exploiting loopholes in informal separations, ensuring fairness and preventing further public disputes. Social gatherings, too, could lead to legal rules. In England, one wedding feast ended in a drunken brawl after disagreements over seating arrangements. Authorities responded with laws regulating banquet conduct, including rules about alcohol consumption and guest behavior. In France, one festival celebration inspired a law forbidding certain games that could incite disputes among families or neighbors. Medieval lawmakers clearly sought to preserve harmony, even during times meant for joy and celebration. Children's behavior could prompt legal intervention as well. In Germany, a group of youths threw stones during a family quarrel, causing damage and injury. The town responded by creating laws that held guardians responsible for their children's actions, emphasizing accountability and community safety. In Italy, laws were enacted after mischievous children disrupted weddings and feasts, showing that even the youngest members of society could influence legislation. And social mobility sometimes required legal clarification. In England, a dispute arose when a wealthy commoner attempted to marry into nobility, causing outrage among the upper class. The town council passed laws regulating marriage between social classes, outlining the proper procedures and approvals required. In France, similar laws ensured that social hierarchies were respected in marital arrangements, showing how deeply societal norms shaped legal frameworks. Even the smallest personal disagreements could have wide-reaching consequences. In Germany, one neighbor feud over a garden fence escalated into a property-wide brawl, prompting laws about fencing, property boundaries, and mediation procedures. In Italy, a dispute over seating at a festival meal led to rules governing the arrangement of guests at public celebrations. Medieval authorities were keenly aware that personal conflicts could spill into the public domain, and laws were created to contain them. So, as we see, medieval laws regarding marriage, family, and social behavior were highly specific, often humorous, and always deeply connected to the realities of daily life. One argument, one offense, or one domestic mishap could ripple across a town and inspire regulations that lasted decades. Medieval lawmakers were careful observers of human behavior, quick to codify rules that maintained harmony and prevented chaos. From dowries to disputes, from courtship to public etiquette, the Middle Ages were full of examples where one incident, sometimes trivial, sometimes explosive, changed the legal landscape forever. And as our journey continues, the next chunk will explore laws inspired by work, guilds, and labor disputes, diving deeper into the strange and fascinating ways medieval societies regulated professional life. Each law has a story, and each story reminds us that in the Middle Ages, even the most personal events could leave lasting legal marks. As we drift further into the intriguing world of medieval laws, we arrive at the bustling streets, workshops, and markets where work, labor, and guilds shaped everyday life and where one incident could inspire lasting legal change. In medieval towns, work was central to survival, and conflicts between workers, masters, and guilds often led to very specific laws. Imagine a blacksmith in England who, frustrated with his apprentices' repeated mistakes, publicly scolded him during market hours. The apprentice's embarrassment sparked a heated argument in the square, drawing a crowd and nearly causing a brawl. The town council responded by enacting a law limiting how masters could discipline apprentices publicly, creating a framework for professional conduct and respect in the workplace. And it wasn't only apprentices who prompted legislation. In France, a carpenter guild became embroiled in a dispute over work standards, with some members using substandard wood, while others insisted on strict quality. After one particularly chaotic incident involving a collapsing scaffold that injured several townspeople, authorities passed laws requiring guilds to enforce uniform quality standards, essentially standardizing labor practices and preventing future accidents. What seems like a bureaucratic rule today was born from one dramatic, real-life event. Workplace accidents were a common source of law. In Germany, a mason accidentally dropped a heavy stone from a scaffold onto a busy street below, injuring passers-by. The town council responded with laws mandating safety measures on construction sites, such as barriers, ropes, and secure scaffolding. Similarly, in Italy, a wheelwright's tools fell from a loft, leading to a law requiring proper storage of dangerous implements in workshops. Medieval lawmakers were keenly aware that one careless act could endanger many, and they codified rules to prevent such hazards. Guilds themselves often inspired very specific legal regulations. In England, a dispute arose between a weaver's guild and a dyer's guild over dye quality and pricing. The disagreement escalated into public brawls in the market. In response, authorities passed laws regulating inter-guild disputes, mandating arbitration and fair pricing procedures. In France, similar laws were enacted to prevent guild conflicts from disrupting trade, showing that one quarrel could ripple across an entire economic system. Even small mistakes could lead to new laws. In Germany, a tanner mismanaged his chemicals, causing a toxic spill that damaged nearby homes and livestock. The town council responded with strict rules on chemical handling and disposal, effectively creating one of the earliest forms of occupational safety law. In Italy, a baker improperly stored flour, leading to spoilage and pest infestations. Authorities passed laws requiring proper storage and hygiene in workshops, demonstrating that medieval lawmakers were observant and pragmatic, learning from individual mishaps. Labor disputes were also fertile ground for legislation. In England, a group of carpenters went on strike after their wages were delayed, blocking streets and preventing merchants from accessing markets. The town council responded by creating laws governing wage payments, strikes, and dispute resolution, ensuring that one work stoppage wouldn't spiral into chaos. In France, similar rules regulated when and how workers could protest, showing that medieval law sought to balance workers' rights with public order, and accidents could occur during demonstrations of skill. In Germany, a blacksmith's apprentice attempted a new forging technique during a festival demonstration, but accidentally injured bystanders with flying sparks. Laws were passed regulating public displays of dangerous work, including distance, supervision, and safety equipment. In Italy, a mason's demonstration of bricklaying on a scaffold led to a fall, inspiring further safety regulations. Medieval towns were densely packed, and one mistake could affect many, prompting lawmakers to codify preventative measures. Even seemingly trivial workplace disputes could have legal consequences. In England, two tailors argued over who had rights to a particular sewing technique. Their dispute escalated into a market-wide confrontation, leading to laws governing intellectual property within guilds. In France, disputes over trade secrets and methods inspired rules about knowledge sharing and fair competition, reflecting a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of professional ethics. Work-related theft also inspired laws. In Germany, an apprentice stole tools from his master, prompting a law requiring workshops to secure tools and maintain inventories. In Italy, a similar incident involved stolen livestock used in guild production, leading to regulations about property, security, and accountability within professional groups. One small theft could prompt widespread measures to protect the entire guild or trade. And sometimes, labor laws were inspired by bizarre incidents. In England, a shoemaker's apprentice accidentally glued his master's shoes together during work, causing a spectacle in the marketplace. The town passed a law regulating apprentices' responsibilities and the supervision required, showing that even minor mishaps could become the basis for legal guidance. In France, a tanner's mishandling of hides led to a stench that caused townspeople to complain, resulting in laws about hygiene and waste management in workshops. Public work projects could also inspire laws. In Germany, a bridge repair went awry, causing part of the structure to collapse during construction. Authorities enacted detailed regulations on labor organization, tool storage, and safety measures, ensuring that one construction mishap wouldn't jeopardize public infrastructure. In Italy, a canal digging project went wrong, flooding nearby farmland. The resulting law regulated project supervision and community consultation, reflecting the interconnectedness of work, environment, and law. And guild competition sometimes led to unexpected regulations. In England, rival bakers sabotaged each other's ovens, causing a small fire that spread to nearby shops. The town council responded by enacting laws governing competition, property protection, and conflict resolution, ensuring that one act of sabotage didn't endanger the entire community. In France, similar incidents prompted rules for dispute arbitration within guilds, balancing rivalry with safety. Even holiday labor could inspire laws. In Germany, workers insisted on celebrating a festival during harvest season, refusing to work and causing local shortages. The town council passed laws regulating labor obligations around holidays, setting clear expectations for work and rest. In Italy, laws ensured that workers received proper compensation for overtime during public projects, preventing disputes from escalating. Medieval lawmakers clearly saw that balancing labor, leisure, and safety required detailed attention, and accidents during routine work also shaped legislation. In England, one man tripped over his tools while tending livestock, injuring a neighbor. The town responded with a law requiring careful organization of tools and equipment, emphasizing responsibility and foresight. In France, a butcher improperly handled knives, causing a serious injury that led to laws about tool handling and public safety in meat processing. So, as we see, medieval laws regarding work, guilds, and labor disputes were highly practical, often inspired by a single incident, and remarkably one apprentice's mistake, one brawl between guilds, or one mismanaged project could ripple across a town, prompting regulations that shaped professional life for decades. From accidents to strikes, from competition to public demonstrations, the Middle Ages were full of examples where one incident changed the rules for everyone. As we wander further into the strange and fascinating world of medieval laws, it's impossible to ignore the rules born from crime, punishment, and the sometimes bewildering loopholes that clever or reckless people exploited. Medieval society was obsessed with order, and one single misdeed could spark legislation designed to prevent repetition, maintain fairness, or even just preserve public morale. Take, for instance, the curious case of the thief who tried to escape justice by hiding in a barrel of wine. In France, this audacious attempt prompted the passing of a law specifying the proper procedure for transporting prisoners and preventing creative but dangerous escape attempts. One person's ingenuity became a legal requirement for the safety of many, and theft was a constant source of regulation. In England, one shoplifter's persistent attempts to steal bread inspired a law requiring merchants to lock their shops and secure their goods during hours when markets were closed. Similarly, in Germany, a clever pickpocket who managed to evade capture by blending into a crowd, caused authorities to pass laws regulating market supervision and the responsibilities of town guards. Medieval lawmakers clearly believed that prevention was better than punishment after the fact. Punishments themselves often inspired further laws. In Italy, one man sentenced to public flogging during a festival reacted violently, injuring spectators. Authorities quickly realized that punishment could inadvertently create new chaos, leading to laws regulating the location, supervision, and conduct of public punishments. In England, a man sentenced to the stocks refused to remain, prompting a law that clarified penalties for escaping minor punishments. These incidents show that medieval law constantly adapted to human unpredictability. Even minor crimes could lead to detailed regulations. In France, a baker repeatedly sold bread that was underweight. While the fines were intended to punish, one dispute over the measurement escalated into a brawl between customers and merchants. In response, authorities passed detailed laws specifying measurements, weights, and fines to prevent future incidents. Similarly, in Germany, a butcher sold tainted meat, inspiring a law that regulated inspections and established penalties for violators. One small act of dishonesty could have long-lasting effects on the legal system. Some laws were created to close bizarre loopholes. In England, one criminal argued that because he had committed theft on a holiday, he shouldn't be punished. Authorities responded by passing a law clarifying that crimes were punishable regardless of the calendar, preventing clever or cheeky arguments from undermining justice. In France, one thief claimed that hiding in a church exempted him from arrest, prompting laws specifying sanctuary rules and their limitations. Medieval lawmakers were constantly refining the law to prevent misuse of technicalities. Crime prevention often intersected with public safety. In Germany, a person attempted to pick a pocket near a busy intersection, causing a panicked horse to bolt and injure bystanders. The town passed a law regulating where and when merchants and citizens could carry valuables, effectively preventing theft-related accidents. In Italy, one prankster stole fruit during a festival, causing a chain reaction of falling carts and minor injuries. Authorities responded by creating rules for supervision and crowd management during public events. Fraud was another area of legal attention. In England, a clever merchant tried to sell fake gemstones, convincing buyers they were real. When the scheme was uncovered, it prompted laws regulating trade, ensuring that sellers were accountable and that customers were protected. In France, a similar incident involved counterfeit coins, leading to strict penalties and detailed legal processes to catch and punish offenders. One act of trickery could ripple across an entire town or even the wider region, and laws governing punishment could be surprisingly specific. In Germany, one man sentenced to whipping protested that his back was already injured, creating confusion about the application of penalties. Authorities passed laws specifying how punishment should be administered, including exemptions for injuries or other conditions. In Italy, one case involved a public humiliation sentence gone wrong, prompting laws about location, supervision, and the manner in which punishments were carried out. Medieval lawmakers clearly learned from experience, refining rules to prevent new problems. Some laws were inspired by accidental crimes. In England, a child accidentally knocked over a basket of coins, leading a passerby to pick them up and be accused of theft. The town responded with a law clarifying ownership disputes and accidental misplacement of property, ensuring fairness and preventing unnecessary arrests. In France, a law arose after a runaway cart caused minor theft of goods, emphasizing the responsibility of owners to secure property and the responsibilities of bystanders in unexpected incidents. Even the most bizarre incidents could inspire regulation. In Germany, one thief attempted to bribe the town guard with a chicken, claiming it was sufficient payment to avoid punishment. Authorities quickly passed a law specifying that bribes of such nature were invalid and punishable, closing loopholes that clever or desperate criminals might exploit. In Italy, one mischievous villager used a trick to avoid fines, prompting rules that defined precisely how penalties could be enforced and under what conditions. Public spaces often required specific laws to prevent crime. In England, a person repeatedly harassed market-goers by blocking stalls and pretending to perform official inspections. Authorities enacted laws regulating inspections, official identification, and responsibilities in public marketplaces. In France, one rogue actor disguised himself as a noble to extort money, prompting laws requiring proof of status and clear consequences for impersonation. Medieval lawmakers were determined to maintain trust and prevent disorder in communal areas, and sometimes crimes inspired laws related to objects. In Germany, one man attempted to steal a church bell, which was so heavy it damaged the surrounding structure during his attempt. The town council responded with laws regulating the protection of valuable objects, their storage, and security measures. In Italy, theft of barrels, livestock, or tools often led to regulations specifying how property should be secured and monitored, reflecting the practical concerns of daily life. Laws also addressed the clever or unusual methods criminals employed. In England, one thief dug a tunnel into a merchant's cellar, prompting legislation regulating the protection of property and excavation near buildings. In France, a group of pranksters used ropes to lower themselves into gardens, inspiring laws against trespassing using unconventional means. Medieval authorities were inventive in anticipating how people might circumvent existing rules. Even laws about punishment reflected creativity in response to misbehavior. In Germany, one person sentenced to public humiliation refused to participate, leading to legal clarification about enforcement and alternatives. In Italy, laws specified how fines could be collected if physical punishment wasn't possible or appropriate. These regulations show a sophisticated, adaptive approach to justice in a world where one unusual incident could set a precedent. So, as we drift through these tales, it becomes clear that medieval laws surrounding crime and punishment were as much about human ingenuity and unpredictability as about maintaining order. One clever thief, one mischievous act, or one unexpected loophole could reshape legal procedures for decades, from theft to fraud, from accidents to elaborate tricks. The Middle Ages were full of examples where individual incidents left lasting legal impressions. As we drift further into the curious world of medieval laws, it becomes clear that some of the strangest regulations were inspired, not by humans, tools, or nature, but by the unpredictable behavior of animals. In the Middle Ages, livestock, pets, and even wildlife played such a central role in daily life that one unusual incident could spark legislation. Imagine, for instance, a bustling English village where a pig escaped its pen and charged into the marketplace, scattering baskets of vegetables, upsetting a cart of eggs, and causing minor injuries. In response, the town council passed a law requiring pigs to be securely penned at all times, essentially creating an early form of livestock management law. And pigs weren't the only culprits. In France, one day a flock of geese wandered onto a busy street, honking loudly and startling a group of horses. The resulting commotion injured several townspeople and damaged goods. Authorities responded by enacting laws specifying how domestic fowl should be restrained or herded near public spaces. Similarly, in Germany, roaming cows grazed on crops that belonged to neighbors, prompting laws requiring clear boundaries, secure fencing, and accountability for stray livestock. One runaway animal could cause chaos, and medieval lawmakers were quick to codify rules to prevent repetition. Even pets could inspire legislation. In Italy, a wealthy merchant's dog bit a passerby, causing a minor scandal and outrage among local citizens. The town council passed a law requiring dogs to be leashed or confined in certain areas, emphasizing the responsibility of pet owners. In England, cats occasionally caused mischief by knocking over stalls or attacking poultry, which led to local regulations about keeping animals under control. In a society where humans and animals lived in close quarters, even small misbehavior could become a legal matter. Wild animals also left their mark on medieval law. In France, one fox repeatedly raided chicken coops, causing financial loss and community frustration. Villagers petitioned authorities, resulting in a law permitting controlled hunting of troublesome animals and defining who was responsible for protecting property. In Germany, wolves occasionally attacked livestock near villages, prompting regulations about the use of traps, watchtowers, and communal defense strategies. Laws were born not only out of necessity, but out of the community's desire to live safely alongside unpredictable creatures. And sometimes, animal-inspired laws were hilariously specific. In England, one man's horse kicked over a cart of apples during a festival parade, causing minor injuries and chaos. The town responded by enacting rules for parade animals, specifying proper control, supervision, and distance from spectators. Similarly, in Italy, a law was passed after a goose chased a child during a fair, mandating that large animals be properly managed in public spaces. Medieval lawmakers clearly saw that even mischievous animals could cause public disorder. Farmyard chaos also inspired practical legislation. In Germany, one farmer's donkey wandered into a neighbor's vineyard, eating grapes and trampling plants. The authorities responded by creating laws requiring animals to be tethered or enclosed and specifying compensation for damaged crops. In France, similar laws arose after incidents involving goats, cows, and sheep wandering into public areas, reflecting the everyday challenges of managing livestock in tight village spaces. Even more unusual incidents led to laws. In England, a group of pigs reportedly broke into a bakery, devouring loaves of bread and disrupting trade. The resulting law mandated proper penning and penalties for owners whose animals caused destruction. In Italy, a swarm of bees escaped during honey collection, stinging bystanders and prompting regulations on the timing and supervision of beekeeping activities. Medieval authorities had to contend with the whimsical but real consequences of animal behavior. Animals weren't the only focus. Laws also addressed chaos caused by wildlife interacting with humans. In Germany, a fox stole chickens from a market stall, prompting regulations about protecting goods and controlling local wildlife. In France, a rabbit invasion of crops led to communal efforts and legal rules about hunting, trapping, and crop protection. It's fascinating to consider that medieval townspeople viewed both domestic and wild animals as entities that needed governance, and the law was their tool for achieving order. And animals could even influence festival regulations. In England, one festival involved horse races, but an uncontrolled horse broke loose, injuring spectators. Authorities passed laws specifying race organization, animal control, and safety protocols for public events. In Italy, a similar law arose after a procession featuring livestock went awry, with animals causing damage to stalls and panicking crowds. Laws ensured that festivals could continue safely, even when unpredictable creatures were involved. Sometimes, domestic mishaps were oddly humorous yet consequential. In Germany, one man's cat climbed into a barrel of wine intended for a festival, spilling it everywhere. The town council responded with regulations about storage and supervision of goods, indirectly addressing animal mischief. In France, similar rules arose after dogs or pigs interfered with food preparation or market displays, highlighting the unpredictable intersection of animals and human commerce. Even hunting incidents inspired legislation. In England, one hunter accidentally killed a noble's prized falcon during a communal hunt. The authorities responded by specifying proper hunting etiquette, ownership rights, and penalties for accidental harm to valuable animals. In Germany, hunting accidents involving deer or wild boar led to laws regulating who could hunt, when, and where, ensuring public safety and protecting property. Medieval lawmakers clearly recognized the dual importance of safety and respect for ownership. And bizarre as it seems, one single animal incident could have wide-reaching implications. In Italy, a rooster crowing at an unusual hour led to a dispute between neighbors, prompting laws about noise and animal management in shared spaces. In France, chickens wandering into a bakery or market stall inspired rules about confinement and liability. Even small, seemingly trivial actions by animals were codified to prevent disorder in tightly packed medieval communities. So, as we reflect on these stories, it's clear that medieval laws were as much about managing animals as they were about managing people. One stray pig, one mischievous dog, or one adventurous fox could prompt a law that lasted generations, shaping the way communities interacted with the natural world. Animals were unpredictable, entertaining, sometimes dangerous, and always capable of changing the rules of society. You said, yes, continue. You said, yes, continue. As we drift toward the end of our journey through medieval laws, it's only fitting that we linger on some of the most bizarre, hilarious, and downright unexpected rules that were ever codified. The Middle Ages were a time of strict social hierarchies, deeply held traditions, and intense attention to order, but that didn't stop lawmakers from being, at times, incredibly specific, quirky, or even slightly absurd in their approach to justice. Take, for instance, a law in England that forbade anyone from wearing a suit of armor in church. On the surface, it might seem like a simple rule about safety, but the story behind it is wonderfully specific. One particularly eager knight had entered the local parish fully armored, clanging and scraping through the nave, startling worshippers and nearly causing a panic. In response, the town council decided to prevent any repeat incidents. One man's overzealous preparation for worship led to a rule that would echo in parish halls for generations. And then there were laws about what one could eat or how one could behave while eating. In France, a law required that bakers not sell pies that contained too many cherries, lest they cause quarrels among children fighting over the last delicious slice. In Germany, towns passed laws limiting the size of sausages sold in markets, because oversized sausages were causing disputes between buyers and vendors. One small culinary incident, and suddenly you had a legal precedent regulating the humble sausage. Animals again made a surprising number of appearances in medieval law. In England, a law forbade pigs from running loose in certain streets after one particularly adventurous hog trampled a market stall, scattering flour, vegetables, and a very upset baker. In France, ducks were prohibited from swimming in public fountains after one daring flock disrupted the town's water supply, leading to complaints and, ultimately, legislation. Medieval towns were not only concerned with human behavior, they were deeply invested in controlling the chaos that animals could unleash. Clothing and fashion rules also reached levels of hilarious specificity. In Italy, a law limited the width of women's sleeves during certain festivals because one particularly extravagant costume had accidentally knocked over stalls and caused minor injuries. In Germany, a rule limited the length of men's hats after one nobleman's towering headpiece blocked the street view and prompted repeated complaints. One excessive display of fashion could inspire a law with a lasting effect. Even the concept of personal hygiene inspired legislation. In England, a law prohibited people from urinating in the streets after one careless resident caused a public altercation. In France, citizens were fined if they left refuse outside their homes, inspired by a particularly messy alley that caused illness and disagreement. Medieval lawmakers were concerned with public health as much as with morality, and one unfortunate incident could lead to formal legal action. And of course, some laws were inspired purely by bizarre accidents. In Germany, a man was fined for accidentally knocking over a neighbor's ladder while climbing to retrieve a lost hat. The resulting law specified liability for accidental damage caused during mundane activities. In Italy, a law addressed the throwing of stones during games, because one child's stone hit a passing horse and nearly caused an accident. Medieval authorities codified even minor mishaps to prevent escalation. Even social etiquette inspired strange rules. In England, a law prohibited shouting across the street to neighbors after one dispute escalated into a brawl. In France, one regulation forbade spitting in public squares after an incident where someone's careless gesture caused a fight over cleanliness. Medieval lawmakers were attentive to human behavior in daily life, realizing that even small acts could lead to disorder. Some laws were about preventing very specific forms of mischief. In Germany, a regulation prohibited ringing church bells at odd hours after one prankster rang them at midnight, causing confusion and waking the entire village. In Italy, one law required that town criers speak clearly and accurately because a misleading announcement once led to panic and a market-wide scramble. The law often grew directly from one disruptive incident, ensuring it would never happen again. And then there were the truly eccentric laws. In England, a rule required that all cats be neutered or otherwise controlled, inspired by one town overrun with feral cats that were causing chaos in markets and homes. In France, a law prohibited people from pretending to be ghosts during festivals, after one particularly convincing prank caused widespread panic. The medieval imagination, combined with a desire for order, could create regulations that seem almost comical today, but were serious matters then. Even transportation inspired unusual laws. In Germany, a regulation prohibited riding goats in public, after one festival participant mounted a goat and caused a minor accident in the marketplace. In Italy, a law forbade carts from carrying excessive amounts of hay through narrow streets because one overloaded wagon toppled and blocked the main thoroughfare for hours. One small disruption could ripple outward, demanding formal rules. And it wasn't always about mischief or accidents. Some laws reflected a community's quirky priorities. In England, a regulation required that all moustaches be neatly trimmed among town officials, inspired by an incident where a particularly unruly facial hairstyle caused distraction and complaints during council meetings. In France, One law dictated the proper folding of flags and banners during ceremonies because one poorly presented banner embarrassed local dignitaries. Medieval lawmakers clearly paid attention to every detail. Even minor misunderstandings inspired legislation. In Germany, a law required that apprentices greet their masters politely. After one incident where a neglected greeting escalated into a full-scale workplace dispute. In Italy, laws regulated how gifts should be exchanged between neighbors to prevent confusion or offense, often inspired by a single awkward incident. The Middle Ages were full of examples where personal interactions created legal change. So, as we reflect on these stories, it's clear that medieval laws were a fascinating blend of practicality, social control, morality, and, at times, absurdity. One runaway pig, one oversized hat, one spilled pie, or one misunderstood greeting could leave a lasting imprint on legal codes. These laws show us that the Middle Ages were not only about knights, castles, and wars, they were about ordinary people, ordinary incidents, and the extraordinary ways society responded to them. And as we close this journey, it's comforting to remember that these laws, born of singular incidents, reveal a deeply human approach to governance. Medieval lawmakers observed, adapted, and codified the chaos of daily life, turning the unexpected, the humorous, and the bizarre into rules that shaped communities for generations. From work to animals, from gossip to fashion, and from roads to public safety, one insane incident could inspire a land. In doing so, leave a story for us to marvel at centuries later. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, imagine the strange, specific, and sometimes ridiculous laws of the Middle Ages, each one a tiny window into a world where even the smallest act could echo through time in the form of a rule, a regulation, or a town decree. And with that, our journey through the most insane and fascinating medieval laws comes to a close.